Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
Today's warehouse needs to keep inventory moving smoothly and quickly. Meet these challenges with on-demand warehouse labeling from Brother Mobile Solutions. Our mobile and industrial printers will help optimize your operations to achieve the speed, reliability, and durability your warehouse needs. With easy integration for existing warehouse technology, convenient portability, and upfront affordability, Brother Mobile Solutions is at your side when it comes to warehouse labeling. Try one for free today by visiting brothermobilesolutions.com/new warehouse or click the link in the show notes. That's brothermobilesolutions.com/new warehouse to try one for free today.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. On today's episode, I am going to be joined by Grant Beringer. He is the Vice President of Integrated Systems at Swisslog Logistics, and Swisslog is providing all types of integrations and automation solutions for the warehousing fulfillment world. And we're going to talk to Grant a little bit about Swisslog, and we're going to talk about automation in 2023, what he's kind of seeing, and we're going to dive into some automation in cold and frozen environments. How is that looking, and how is that working as well? Something I'm pretty interested in learning about here. So, Grant, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Good to meet you, Kevin.
Good to meet you as well. Good to get you on the show here, and Swisslog as well. So before we kind of dive into the topics here, why don't you give us a little bit of a brief overview of Swisslog and what it is that you guys do?
Yeah, so Swisslog Logistics is a warehouse automation solution provider. Mm-hmm. So we're a global company, offices in 25 countries and over 2,000 projects implemented globally. So what we do, we basically have a range of automation technologies for handling the different warehouse transport units, whether it be pallets, cases, or units. And so everything from storage and retrieval machines to conveyors to autonomous mobile robots and all the way to fully automated picking robots.
Right.
So, we work with clients to understand their warehouse and logistics requirements, and then together design and develop and implement automation solutions within their warehouse facilities.
All right, great. And basically, giving that kind of end-to-end automation solution options and being able to integrate those. So it's definitely great services offered there. And certainly something that's been top of mind for the last couple years, and even increasingly more going into this year is automation, right, in the warehouse. So tell us a little bit about what is your kind of outlook, I guess, for the automation world in the fulfillment distribution space coming into 2023 now?
Yeah, well, the last few years, we've seen significant growth in warehouse automation.
Right.
And we expect that to continue with some adjustments. So, the last few years, we saw really a boom in e-commerce operations. The pandemic really prompted a large surge in e-commerce investment as companies look to expand their DC networks for that particular operation. So there was record growth in the last years,
right,
in terms of warehouse automation. Now that the conditions have eased a bit, consumers are starting to return to stores. So some of that investment is certainly scaling back. You might have seen, Amazon is reducing their investment, and some of the labour is being reduced. You see in the news recently. So we're expecting to see a dampening of the investment in e-commerce in the next year or two. But having said that, some of the effects of the pandemic still remain, and it's still driving growth in automation. So we're seeing a lot of organisations continue to modernise their supply chains. In the last few years, businesses learned through painful experience that their supply chains weren't as robust as they might have thought, and so they're going through the term supply chain has become known like never before as people see the effects of supply chains being clogged. So we are seeing organisations continue to modernise their supply chains, and that includes warehouse automation.
Right.
Yeah, and we're still seeing the labour scarcity, which particularly for menial jobs like warehouse tasks, as labour is becoming harder to find and keep within warehouses, the business case for automation improves. So overall, although we're seeing, I think, a dampening of e-commerce investment in 2023, we're certainly continuing to see a growth in overall automation investment.
Interesting, yeah, and I think it's certainly something that you touched on a big point there about the labor and the scarcity of labor, and I think it's even as we see, calling back to last year at Modex, I think I would say that's like the number one thing I heard from everybody was like, we're trying to figure out how do we deal with this labor shortage, right? And even now, looking at that, it's still difficult because I think people are just coming out of the pandemic. It seems like people are looking at the idea of work in different ways, I think, and wanting to have more flexibility, and working in a warehouse fulfillment space is not necessarily the most flexible job all the time, right? Because it's always something going on. You have to be there physically, pretty much. So moving towards that automation, I think, is certainly something that companies are looking at to be able to deal with that. And as you mentioned, Amazon, I think, is producing by something like 17,000 employees or something, is the most recent news. And so actually, maybe for the warehouses that have been having trouble finding people, there might be 17,000 people out there for you pretty soon. But with that being said, I mean, the automation is a key, I think, to start for companies who haven't started investing in it to start this year and at least start that journey, because I don't think it's going to get, I don't think suddenly, next year, like, people are just going to wake up and be like, oh my God, I want to work in a warehouse, right? This is an amazing thing, right? I don't think there's going to be some overnight TikTok trend that's going to drive Gen Z to get into the warehouse, right? So you have to plan for like these long-term future and things like that. So really interesting outlook there. It would be interesting to see how these things develop over the year as well. So, with the warehousing and the automation, there's, warehousing is a basic concept, right? There's four walls and some boxes inside. Boxes go in, boxes go out, to the outside world. But there's a lot going on behind the scenes, especially in there. And there's different types of warehousing too, right? So one type of warehousing is the cold chain storage, right? And cold chain fulfillment. And that's something that has, especially with the spike in grocery delivery and people, not being able to go to the store during the pandemic, consumer behavior is changing a little bit. A lot more people ordering groceries and things that would be frozen or cold online. With that being said, cold chain space has been, very high demand because of lack of space, right? And the infrastructure to build out new cold chain locations is just, very, very costly and very time consuming too to build out that space. So I'm curious, how has Swisslog kind of approached the cold arena and helped companies to try and better utilize their existing space or work with them to develop new spaces that can be potentially automated or work in a more efficient way? Yeah.
No, one of the prime applications for automation is the cold storage warehouse. All those issues we mentioned with labor in general,
right?
It's physically demanding, it's repetitive work, it's difficult. All of those aspects are only amplified by the fact when you're working in a very cold
0 degree, right?
Yes. So, but I mean, one of the advantages, apart from the labour reduction or labour cost reduction that automation brings, is the density of storage that automation provides. So you can improve the storage density and the density of operations within your warehouse. So you can do more in a smaller space, which obviously for freezer operations is critical, because if you can reduce the cubic space that you're working within, you can reduce your energy costs, that you actually don't need to pay as much to cool that box that you're working within. And then on top of that, obviously, there's the other benefits of reducing the size of the warehouse, and that's the cost of land and the cost of the building that you're actually needing to invest in. So, yeah, one of the ways that automation reduces that cubic space is to reduce footprint. So you can store products up higher vertically.
Yeah.
So using a high bay warehouse, so we could store pallets up above 120, 130 feet in the air, using an automatic storage and retrieval machine. So imagine a fork truck, but with a 120-foot high mast that essentially can access very high racks.
Yeah.
So as you increase the density, you can increase the density of the operation as well. So you don't need as many access aisles, both for people and fork trucks, given that automation can work in tighter spaces with less of those aisles required, so you can reduce the overall footprint. And then the other way of reducing the space that's needed for cold storage is to have very deep lane storage. So if you imagine a traditional manual rack, which might store a pallet single deep or double deep, with automation you can store very deep, 20 or 30 pallets, and have the automation retrieve it. And that just reduces the number of aisles that are needed, and therefore reduces the overall footprint. So along with the labour benefits, particularly for cold storage, reducing that cubic volume really reduces the overall energy costs and the operating costs of a facility. So it really is one of the key areas that Swisslog and automation providers are involved in.
Interesting. So now when you're talking about, storing up to 120 feet high, right? Are you seeing that people in the cold space are taking existing cold spaces and then trying to figure out how to better optimize those with automation, or is this more like, let's build out a new building and we'll build it more to the specs of the automation that we can utilize?
Yeah. We're actually seeing both. So both existing warehouses that are being either retrofitted, replacing that manual area with automation, or having extensions built on to the existing facility. So it's a combination of manual and automated operations. And we're seeing that quite a bit. So I did see a stat from JLL that said that over 70% of cold storage warehouses in the US are over 20 years old. So there's, on top of those other trends we've talked about, there's this drive towards upgrading and modernising facilities, and that's leading to, particularly in the cold storage space, investment in automation.
Interesting. And now, in terms of the distribution of the temperature, like as you see, and you get very dense storage out of something like an ASRS or something like that, or like a pallet shuttle system, do you, or are you able to have either, consistent temperature throughout the entire system, or is there different, levels of temperature, is it like all the way at the bottom? Is that like frozen and then it gets a little warmer as it moves up? I mean, how does that kind of distribution work? Yeah.
So typically we'll break up the warehouse into different temperature zones for the different product temperatures. So it might be a chamber for ice cream at minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and one for your dairy products and deli products, etc. But yeah, there are sort of temperature gradients within those chambers. There are refrigeration experts that do all the calculations there to make sure that the flow of air is maintaining a consistent temperature within that chamber, which is a whole science in itself. So typically Swisslog would work together with those refrigeration consultants to design the overall system to make sure that the product is kept at the correct temperature within the chambers.
Interesting. Okay. And then so if you take like an existing freezer or cold space and you're bringing in an automation solution into there, now would the freezer setup and the refrigeration setup need to be altered, or can the automation solution like work around the existing infrastructure?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
So yeah, I think to maintain the sort of temperature flows, adding in the automation aisles can modify that quite a bit. So you typically would have to reassess the refrigeration design as well.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, maybe including fans in particular areas to blow along the aisles. That sort of change might be required.
Okay, interesting. I'm curious about that. And so, one of the things, and, certainly something that's kind of come up as I've talked to a couple people in my network who are working in cold spaces and trying to figure out how do they, either optimize their existing space or build out new spaces. When it comes to automation, obviously, automation in a regular ambient temperature environment, temperature is not so much of a factor, right, on moving mechanical things, right? But when you get to, like sub-zero temperatures and things like that, obviously you start to have some concerns about mechanical things and, what's the life on certain parts, and, are there things that maybe you might seize up because they get frozen, potentially, right, or anything like that. So when you're building out these systems and coming up with these plans for the integrations, I mean, how do you account for the temperatures and how do you ensure that you won't have those downtimes or quite often having things kind of break down because of the temperature strain?
Right. Yeah, I mean, having spent a little bit of time in minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, it's a miserable temperature you want to get out as soon as you possibly can. Yeah, I mean, I think the first point, I guess, is a lot of the technologies we install within cold storage environments are really tried and tested. The traditional storage retrieval machine, shuttle systems really are very reliable. Now we're typically running 99% availability, whether that be ambient or freezer temperatures, so that and we're not talking about leading edge sort of automation being implemented within those cold store environments. But I mean, certainly we have to design those technologies so that they are rated for that type of environment. So all of the materials, whether it be the steel, the electrical components, they're all rated for those temperatures. Lubrication is key. Obviously, lubrication changes qualities within that temperature. But of course, things still happen and things break down. So with Swisslog's equipment, we make sure that, along with being reliable, that any maintenance that is going to be required can be done as quickly as possible. So You make sure that parts that are going to need to be replaced can be quickly removed, so we have quick disconnects. We make sure that if there is a significant part that might be difficult to remove, that it's designed in a position where it's easy to get to, so that we can really, in the rare case there are maintenance or replacement tasks needed, we can do it quickly and get the people out of that cold environment.
Interesting. Yeah. I was curious about that because, especially because it's so many, moving parts and things going on and things, thinking too, with the system. I mean, it's important that you don't want to put in something and then, have a pallet stuck somewhere in the system, or a bin stuck somewhere in the system, and not be able to get in and have that downtime essentially. So really good to hear that, the solutions are now, being built out so that they can accommodate those temperatures, and it's being thought in a way that, if there is an issue, it's easily accessible and can be troubleshooted or repaired rather quickly. So I think that's a really good thing. So I'm curious, because I've seen a couple different ideas of the solution where, you have an ASRS, basically that's like in a cold space, in a freezer, basically a cold box, or where it's also on the side of like if product is in a bin, like the bin itself is temperature regulated within the bin, and then it's not actually like in a cold space, and then it's just the power is just refrigeration in the bin. So I mean, what are you seeing in terms of that side, and what technology do you think is maybe leading the way, or maybe a little more efficient or better in that sense? I mean, what do you think on that side?
Yeah, in terms of transport units, I mean, certainly the pallet transport unit is the one that is most often used for cold storage. Often it's the bulk storage within a pallet ASRS warehouse, often then decreased down to a case level. So there's I guess more work being done on that case level and tote level within a freezer environment. The pallet ASRS solution is now many years in operation, and as we move into higher levels of automation, with picking, fully automated case picking, right. That's going to become more and more developed, I would say. Again, around those labour challenges that we talked about, traditionally, automation has replaced the replenishment and the transport within the warehouse, which is relatively easy to automate. More as labour becomes less available, then more and more of those processes within the warehouse are going to become automated, and picking, which is actually the largest sort of labour component within a warehouse, the most labour intensive. It's the more difficult one to automate, but that is more and more where we're seeing automation develop within the freezer environment. So we're seeing fully automated case picking within freezers, everything from the receiving all the way through to building a store pallet.
Yeah, interesting. And I think it's an interesting point there, because I think, it's one thing is to do the bulk storage and the movement and, like you said, the cases, but then also seeing more on the e-commerce side too, in terms of cold and frozen. I think when it gets down to the each picking side of like frozen or cold materials, I think that's an interesting challenge, because it's like you have I know the gripper technology is out there, right? And it's been evolving quite nicely, and figuring out how to try and do different shaped packages or different rigidity of packages and stuff like that. But I think if it's cold, right, it kind of adds an additional layer of, it might be like a little slippery in a sense, I think, right? So even that is kind of interesting challenge to see how that'll kind of work out as well. So what do you see, and I guess what is Swisslog maybe potentially seeing as like automation evolution over like the next few years, specifically in the cold storage industry? Like what are people looking for, and what are companies like working towards to develop?
Yeah. No, what we see in the next few years is, I guess, around the two aspects we've talked about, which is the upgrading of now outdated freezer warehouses to add automation, and then the increasing the levels of automation across the warehouse so that we're essentially taking out the majority of labour, so that we're getting fully automated mixed SKU case palletizing so that we can reduce that labour component. And then thirdly, what you've just described there, actually going from case robotic picking down to a unit size picking within a freezer. And that's still at earlier stages of development for the reasons you mentioned. It's both the product itself is difficult within that environment, but also the equipment that's needed. It's more and intricate within a freezer environment. But that's certainly in the works. But I mean, Swisslog here in Americas, we're preparing for more and more of that fully automated case picking, high levels of automation, for all the reasons we've described, both the labour challenges that are there, the energy costs which are increasing, and the need to decrease the overall DC or warehouse operation costs. So they're the areas that we're seeing, particularly around the cold storage market.
Okay. All right. Very interesting stuff, and very interesting to hear more about this cold space. I think it's certainly a different type of challenge from a typical dry storage space, and so it's interesting to hear about solutions around that and how people are tackling that, especially because even though it's challenging, it's still in very much high demand, right? People still need it, obviously. And, so it's great to learn more about this from you, Grant, and hear more about Swisslog as well. So I want to thank you for coming on the show today and talking to me. If people want to learn more about Swisslog, how can they do that?
They can go to our website, www.swisslog.com, and you can find there our local Swisslog office. We have offices across the Americas, but also globally. And we'd be happy to talk to them and understand their particular specific needs, and we can work together to develop and design a solution that works best.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well. So, Grant, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.